I'm so grateful to be participating in this event today. I've heard so much about it, but really didn't know the genesis of it or how it started. But I'm just so glad to be with you today virtually. As Ria mentioned, my intention was actually to be there in person, but I had to travel on Sunday for business. But I'm back and I'm just excited to share whatever I have. What I'm worried about is Ria has talked so well about me. I don't even know if I'll meet those expectations. Ria, you remember those meeting expectations of being passionate, being focused, and being results oriented? I do hope that I will meet those expectations. Maybe just a little bit about myself before we start, and I'll show that on a slide, and then after that I'll speak. And I told Ria I'm now retired, so I can do whatever I want. So let me show you what I have, and then we can take it from there. And then you can let me know if you can see my screen. Can you see from the audit to the boardroom?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, let me just put it up, and then we'll switch to. Can you see it?
Yes, thank you.
Right. So I think just to start, mine has been a 35-year plus journey. And sometimes when I look back, and it doesn't look that way. And by the way, I walk a little bit faster than that tortoise. But I do believe the tortoise is, I think, a perfect representation actually of our journey, both at a personal level and a career. And in order to put some context to my journey in the audit profession, the implications and where I am today, I just thought, let me give a perspective of where I've come from and how it led me to where I am today. So because I'm retired, I'm calling the first half my very first half, like it's a hectic pace, it's frantic, it is high pressure, and it's the first half. Up to 2022. So as you can see there, my career started in 1985 with one of the big four. I was with PwC for many years, for 7 years in external audit in East Africa and in the UK. And then after that, after being in the profession, I was starting a family and the pressure somehow became too much for a young mother. And I decided to join my client who actually happened to be looking for me to join them, which was Shell. And you can see the oil and gas there. And I joined them in their exploration and production business, which was very strange. And I was quite fascinated to listen to Agnes speaking, because when you're invited from external audit and suddenly you're going into operations of an exploration and production venture, it's daunting because, I mean, you're an auditor. What do you know about that? So I joined the Shell Exploration and Production joint venture with Mobil Total when they were looking for oil in East Africa. That was a fantastic experience. I got to work with geologists, exploration engineers, going into very tough places, being flown on, 4-seater planes and praying that I get home alive. And just getting exposure to a different world, but I think more importantly, from a different lens. So I was now not an auditor anymore. I was on the other side experiencing the world. So I was with them for some years, a couple of years or 3. We didn't find commercially viable quantities. And just at that time, the general manager for finance and administration was going back to the UK. And I was asked to take on the role of general manager finance for the Shell Chemicals operations. Again, another daunting experience, being the youngest person. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, being the youngest person, you're female, this at that time very male-dominated environment, and going in at such a high level, that was really daunting for me. But I took it in my stride, and it also exposed me to operating at very high levels, managing teams. And then just at that time, for family reasons, my husband moved to South Africa in 1997. And I then needed to move. And Shell told me, well, you can move, but the only opportunities in South Africa is internal audit. And I must say, which, on reflection, it's interesting. At that time, internal audit didn't have such a great reputation. And I was wondering, why would I be moving from where I am to internal audit? What do they do? Only for them to say, well, in oil and gas, whether you're Engen, BP, Shell, if you're on a track to become one of the executives, you have to go through audit, because internal audit is the only function in any organization that exposes you to the whole organization from top to bottom. Yeah, with any others you want. So when you go to HR, you're in HR. But internal audit will give you exposure. And that intrigued me. And I said, okay, I'll join. And therefore, I landed in Johannesburg in 1997. I stayed there until 1999. And then someone told me there was an opportunity in Ernst & Young to start risk consulting in the oil and gas space. And that's how I ended up in Ernst & Young in 1999 as a senior manager. I became a partner in 2001 while we were still in the Johannesburg office. Again, a daunting experience. A Kenyan in South Africa in consulting, becoming a partner at that age. And it was, I want to use the word interesting. I don't want to say challenging, because for me, I always see this as opportunities to learn. So I was in business risk consulting. And then that's where I was for many years. And that during that time, I got the opportunity to move from, not only being just an engagement partner, and as Ria said, the highlight of one of those was us being partners on Transnet, which at the time was a massive, massive undertaking. We were charging close to 400,000 hours per annum. It is hard to believe that just one division at that time was over 200,000. And Ria and I worked very closely on that. And that was, we've got scars and things to show for that. And I must say, it stood out as really one of the transformational experiences in terms of how internal audit can play a strategic role in actually supporting the executive and the board in directing the business. Then as I headed towards 5 years to my retirement, I was asked to open our consulting practice in East Africa. So I became our managing partner of our country practice. And also while I was in South Africa, I was also looking after our risk consulting practices across our African countries. That time we were across 33 African countries. And I became the leader at the time when we were integrating our practices across Africa. That was very interesting, because suddenly now you have Francophone, Anglophone, and Lusophone trying to come together. So the different cultures, the different maturity levels, and just trying to get us to operate as one firm. So obviously there was a bigger role of the executive to get it happen. But for me, in the risk space, how do I get our risk partners and our risk teams to work together? That was quite an interesting experience. And then when I then left to join the East African practice, as I said, it was to start our consulting business. And that introduced me for the first time into hard public sector reform. And the reason why I emphasize this here is, whilst I got the opportunity to work on internal audit engagements across multiple sectors, one of which was government sector in South Africa, which was national government, provincial, and municipal. This particular public sector reform was now in the consulting space, where suddenly you're thrust in a space where you have to advise governments on how they should reform. Again, completely new area, but really fascinating, because we got to change the architecture of government, change how they structure their teams, how they deliver, and how they remunerate. Highly political, because typically when you get involved in something like that, you have to actually scale down. Now, no government in their right sense, okay, for us it's right sense, but no government, especially politicians in their right sense, wants to get rid of thousands, tens of thousands of employees a year or two to their election year, right? And that's how we found ourselves. So again, one of the highlights, and then overall extensive involvement in practice management. I decided to add those two things at the bottom, and Agnes actually put a good segue into this, because each of these phases gave me an opportunity to develop myself, so leading myself, leading others, leading business, each from a different lens. And the context of this, given what we are talking about today, is being an auditor that has impact. If you look at the aspects of leading self, it's actually about being self-aware. It's about being human, being empathetic, being able to stand where you are, but still being able to stand in others' shoes. And for internal auditors or risk professionals, it's so critical because you need to actually have a very deep sense of the business. You need to have a very deep sense of the people you're advising. What do they actually want? What's their pain point? And I think for me personally, I think it's only when you get that you can effectively advise the client, that you can effectively have impact rather than just sitting on this side. And the middle part of this gave me access to that experience because I got to sit on the other side of the table where I was now being advised by auditors or consultants. And suddenly I was able to see that whatever it is that we used to advise or tell clients, some of it really doesn't matter when it comes to the critical survival of the organization. And for me, it made me think as an auditor, what am I going to say that will really help this HR person, that will really help this finance person, that will really help this CEO, that makes sense, other than just giving them an audit report which says, well, we found this control was broken. The point is, so what? What does it mean for me in my role? What does it mean for the bottom line? What does it mean for our staff? What does it mean for our stakeholders? And that thinking helps us approach the audit differently, helps us communicate differently, and forces us to think of the insights that make a difference. And when I put this thing about leading self and leading others, it then forces you to know, who am I and how do I get myself to really think in the feet of this person or this organization? How can I effectively lead others to think likewise? How can I improve my ability or my credibility and therefore be able to influence how I contribute to the organization? How do I broaden my horizon so that I can lead the business, given that now as you lead the business, your stakeholders are not just internal, you have a lot of external stakeholders like regulators, the community and other stakeholders that might have an interest not only in our reports, but in our organization. And I could talk about this forever, but I thought in the context of internal audit, let's look at it that way. And then I came to my second half, which I call the deliberate second half, which is where I am since I retired. And I said, I'm now going to be selfish and really focus on a few things. So I'm not going to look at all these segments. The only one I wanted to look at was really the intellectual stimulation by the board, because I knew that as part of coming from the audit profession, I've learned so much, I've met so many people, and I want to continue serving as a healthy, socially, physically, mentally healthy individual. And what space is that will continue to give me continuing intellectual stimulation? And hence I said, I'm just going to focus on boards. And I got fascinated by boards. And in fact, my paper, I did my executive MBA with the University of Cape Town. My topic was on how can boards continue to create momentum and protect organizations amidst all this chaos, amidst VUCA, because there's just so much going on. How do they do that? And that was my sole reason for doing boards. I'm fascinated by what they do. I have huge respect for boards because they are a stakeholder group that meet a few times a year, but yet have such a heavy responsibility on their shoulder in terms of supporting their executives? How do they actually do it? And that was the basis of my thesis. And here is what I found out, and then I'll go off screen. And this was not, you can go to ChatGPT and find this, but I can tell you, as recent as yesterday and Tuesday and last week, I've been sitting on boards that have been hugely affected by this. If you look at economic uncertainties and volatility, today, two of the organizations I sit on have been directly or indirectly affected by the pronouncements of the president of the US. The withdrawal of aid or grants to Africa has an immediate impact in terms of employees losing their jobs, some projects being stopped. What do you do as a board? How do you manage this? And those issues around geopolitics, when now the world is going more, you have leftist versus rightist views, is having a huge, huge impact in terms of investment direction, in terms of where resources are moving to. And most organizations are affected because those sources, you either rely on them as consumers to take up your products, or you rely on them as sources of supply. So, for example, the Ukraine-Russian war, where one of the boards that I sit on was reliant on them for the supply of cereals, it has a massive impact. One of the boards I sit on was affected by the conflict on the Red Sea because ships can't move there anymore to get goods from Europe via the Red Sea to Africa. They now have to go all the way around across to West Africa via Cape Town and back to East Africa. The cost implications of that, they were not factored into our business plans. The war in Ukraine, or even in the DRC right now, are not factored in our plans. President Trump's pronouncements and even the reduction of aid by the UK recently that were not factored in our plans. And now we are in a position where we have a major shock. What do we do? Because in some of those markets, we were close to actually finalizing major acquisition deals. Those have suddenly stopped. In one of the boards I sit on, we had staff in a conflict area. We had to withdraw them. So, what's the implication of that? And then lastly, when it comes to market volatility, when interest rates go high, unpredictable, what happens to, when the yield curve goes very high, what's the impact on your balance sheet? So those are, things that as a board you have to grapple with and think about who is giving me comfort. You go to industry, I call it industry ambiguity or convergence. I'm sure you've experienced that. If you look at a lot of industries today, you actually don't know which industry you're serving. And that's where the competition comes from. A lot of organizations today, financial services, FMCG, telcos, do not look like the original form that they were many, many years ago because everything is merging. And any company that doesn't recognize that and have a strategy in place or an innovation lab that's constantly thinking around how to respond is going to be wiped out tomorrow. We've got regulatory complexities that we have to be aware of, technological advancements, some of which have created cybersecurity threats, data privacy requirements, sustainability, and ESG and war for talent. These are just some of today's challenges, and the boards I sit on face this. And in two of them, I chair the audit committee. And the question I've always asked is, my auditor is actually giving me very nice they've become so advanced now. They're nice, beautiful dashboards, yellow, green, with arrows pointing left. They're all bells and whistles. And then I look at it and then I go back to this screen that I've just shown you. Then I said, but you haven't told me how to be resilient. This is beautiful. But what am I supposed to do with this report? And my fellow board members, they look at it, and now what literally happens in practice in almost all the boards I sit on, except where I would say the internal audit has become very mature, you can see we go through the agenda and the internal audit is at the back. By the time we get there, people are tired, they're not interested, there's nothing you can tell them. On one of them, it's a listed entity where I sit. I've asked that on 2 of the quarters, internal audit and risk must be first on the agenda and they'll be the priority so that we swap, so that we give them the time they need, because you can't have them last on the agenda. So they're the first on the agenda. But still, when they go through their report and I read the faces and the mood of the rest of the board members, I don't see a reaction from the other board members. I don't see a level of interest or engagement or incisive questions. And I had to sit back and ask, I wonder why. It's because we've just come from a session where we're discussing these things. And then you go to a session where internal audit comes and tells them that, I don't know, maybe, something was not approved. The thing is, so what? So what? I want to go into DRC to open a business. Can you, from an internal audit, can you tell me, how do I future-proof my business for resilience? Are you constantly monitoring and scanning the environment? Are you reading journals? Is your team involved? Because other than academic qualifications, which you do need to get and which give you the license to operate as an auditor, are you constantly abreast, watching the news, reading the news, and then making that part of what you do? Or are you reading it, leaving it there, and then you say, okay, now let me go and work? Those items you read, even the ones which might sound flippant, when Elon Musk makes an announcement, you need to think back and say, could this actually affect our business? We need to make the connections of this ecosystem, because what does it?
Oh no, please don't tell us.
Yeah, it's moving very fast. It's moving faster than us. We are not keeping up. And by the time we give a report, it's too late. I looked at a report. We had an audit committee on one of the companies a week ago, and someone did an audit the previous quarter, and they say they gave a clean bill of health to that particular area they were looking at. And it just happened that the time we were looking at it, that particular project was also completed. It did not meet any expectations. So my question was, when you are auditing, what were you looking at? Are you actually looking at the right things? Are you giving us business insights? And I think for me, the audit of the future is going to be an audit function that actually thinks of itself as a business partner that has a vested interest in the outcome of that organization's objectives. Really, you have to be, it's your own objectives. And therefore, if you see them that way, that means then you must be constantly worrying about it. And I go back to when I talked about leading self and leading others. When you're self-aware and empathetic, you then can feel the shoes of the business. You can feel the shoes of the executive and the board where they're hurting the most. And therefore, scan in the appropriate context, stay informed in the appropriate context. Help them know and go to sleep easy knowing that if this happens today, that happens today, we are resilient. It can't be 100%, but at least give us that comfort. Look at the right things. Give us business insights. And I believe that with the advancements of technology, we've got AI, data analytics, robotics, and continuous auditing. We need to deeply and seriously leverage that to not only give us insights into what I've just talked about, but I think more importantly, to shift our focus from the mundane, important matters. I'm calling them mundane but important because they're hygiene matters that must go right in an organization. But it's not worth spending all our time on it if we can use technology to put a spotlight on them. can we leverage technology to give us continuous comfort on those areas and shift our focus and resources to the items that matter for the board? So my hair doesn't look gray, but it's actually gray because I get, I look at this thing and I'm thinking, am I going to be one of those boards of directors that will be seen um, in the newspaper with the handcuffs behind me or anything? I don't want to be that, and that's why I'm saying that we really need to get to a space where we are focusing on the right things, and we are living in an era where we have the technology to help us with that. So I think just to conclude, I want to say that my journey as internal audit, external audit, and a corporate professional have played a key role in helping me think the way I think. They've given me the experiences that are necessary to shift my focus and contribute to where I am, and have made me actually see the important role we play. I go back to what that Shell executive told me, that for you to be an effective leader in any business, which is Shell, and you can imagine Shell, it's a massive organization, you have to go through audit. Whether you're an engineer, whether you're a nurse, you have to go through it. And I'm so grateful that I got the chance to go in there and do that. So I'm now using that experience to, give back to boards. And the one thing I also didn't mention as part of my circle, which is my deliberate last half, also using that in terms of how can I, give back to the community, again, with that mindset. Because again, there are objectives. How do we build a better and sustainable community? And I just wish I was there, Ria, to engage further. But I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share what I have to share today. And I'm just glad that that Shell executive insisted that I go to internal audit, because I wouldn't be here speaking today, because my trajectory then was not headed towards internal audit, but I wouldn't change it. I'm glad I took this path. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to listening to the other speakers and engaging further. Thank you.